Hi, we're here at Reservoir Pool in Victoria, and this is a place where I used to come regularly, still come regularly for a sauna, important part of my treatment. I'd like to go through a few steps, a timeline if you like, over the 24 months from my journey with stage 4 lung cancer and initially getting a prognosis of 3 months to live. Now, I've got some nice scientific charts here written by hand of that journey of the treatments I received and the results that occurred. The main thing I want to go through step month by month or step by step on this is to look at the kind of choices that came up and to look at the kind of information I sought in my journey where I had 4 major treatments. 2 traditional ones, if you like, radiation and chemotherapy, and then of course I had medical cannabis and immunotherapy, which was a new treatment here in Victoria. So, and in addition to that, I made 39 lifestyle changes as I went along. Now that in total was about 6 different diet changes through the 24 months, and as you go through that, you'll see that when people ask, oh, how did you beat stage 4 lung cancer? There's no golden bullet or golden pill. It's a matter of working with your oncologists and asking for the treatments. They'll be responding to the treatments that are specific for you, and then making lifestyle and diet changes that complement those treatments. So again, you can consult with your oncologist as you go along with those. So initially, many people have different ways that they're first told they've got cancer, usually from a scan. With me, I realised I was very sick at the end of December 2016, very overweight, never been that overweight, tired, stressed out, stomach ache, and I literally couldn't move after the Christmas family get together. So my response to that was, like many Australian men, just thinking it's overeating, over drinking, and I didn't go to a doctor. Instead I went to a property I had where some landscaping was required, and I stopped eating red meat, I stopped having grog, and stopped having sugar, and I went on to a program of heavy labour, and I was moving actually 12 tonnes of screenings onto a driveway. The end of that month I'd lost 13 kilos, got down to or more than 13 kilos, and the heavy shoveling had really created a lot of upper body sweating and exercise that I wasn't accustomed to for some time. So even though I had been doing some house renovations a year before, but this was 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon, and it was 37-degree heat. So that made a big impact, and I wasn't at that point seeking to do anything apart from just lose weight. I thought that might, stop my stomach aches, etc., or other aches and pains. Now, at the end of that, actually, what occurred is I did have some rib pain, and when I finished that, I then went to the doctor, who thought, well, maybe you've broken one of your ribs. I thought that was strange, and to get a scan. So towards the end of January, around the beginning of February, I got a CT scan, and my doctor rang me once he got the results and said, well, your right lung's full of tumours, cancer tumours. He was very serious, he was very depressed, I think, when he told me that news, and it was like getting a death sentence even at that point. Of course, the next step in that process is a referral by the GPs to a cancer specialist hospital, and obviously we've got some excellent ones here in Melbourne. So he referred that, and he had actually taken the liberty of faxing that straight away. And he said he then got my permission, but he said, well, it's so serious, I just thought I'd straight away send it. And so that really, introduced the C word to me, but I'd obviously been sick for some time. Tumours had been growing without me noticing, but my overall health was in decline. From that period, it was very stressful waiting and to be brought into the hospital because of some kind of mix-up that took 5 weeks rather than the normal 2 weeks for them to actually look at my scans. In that time, I networked through other people, local survivors of cancers and their carers, and I began to change some of my diet, and I also even started on cannabis oil at that point. As the pain was getting more intense and I was waiting on the ribs, what I found out later, of course, is that I had 3 or 4 major tumours of 4 centimetres in size that were pushing against the spine and introducing nerve pain that was shooting around the ribs. So it was not a broken rib or strained rib or anything. It was the cancer actually finally impacting on my nerve system. So that's when I began to take the oil to go to sleep because I wasn't getting any sleep. And the opiates they gave me for painkillers at that point didn't blunt the nerve pain, so they didn't help me get sleep, and they only last for 4 hours. So almost by accident, I stumbled upon something I'd later find out is a normal treatment, or a treatment that's been tested for 30 years in studies in Israel, and is a standard treatment in the US to accompany medical cannabis in pain relief, to allow the immune system a chance to rest and the body to rest, so the immune system can actually do its job, which is to get rid your body of cancer cells, including tumours. So that was very stressful waiting in the system. Obviously in that period I did also get to go to a specialist who then opened up the scan and could show me more about it. And of course, the more I saw inside the lungs, not just the 4 centimetre tumours, but there were a whole lot of tumours about 1 centimetre in size or smaller, and the whole lung was just cluttered. So from that point I knew it was inoperable from that advice, but I was still waiting to get admitted to a public hospital. Initially, once I was admitted, I went into 5 days of radiation therapy, which was targeted at these larger tumours in the right lung. There was also a large tumour in the left lung that was pushing into my bone also. There was also a 4 centimetre tumour in my thyroid. But the 3 tumours in the right lung that were pushing onto the spine were really seen as life-threatening, and that's why initially there was a 3-month diagnosis given, or prognosis given. From that, after the initial 5 days of radiation therapy, I started on some fairly heavy chemotherapy, and went through the normal practice of PET scans at that time, and I was on up to 4 opiates or painkillers in relation to day-to-day pain, and in March that got much worse. I could barely stand up in the mornings because of the pain. Of course, at this stage I was starting to be mainly on a vegetarian diet, no meat, no grog, no sugar, and really I was to find out later, really what I was on was almost a fruit and veg fast for quite a while. In that initial 2-month period that have an overlapping of treatments, which is dietary changes, and obviously heavy exercise. I was doing 10,000 steps, not doing the digging or anything, but doing fully 10,000 steps and keeping myself active. And so there was an overlapping of no treatment for 5 weeks, the medical cannabis starting, and then going through that period, and then overlapping with the beginning of chemotherapy. And so with the initial chemotherapy, about 5 to 6 weeks, went into another PET scan, second PET scan, and that was on around April the 26th. And that was quite a lot of change that the oncologist didn't anticipate. Myself, I was hoping, based on nothing but hope, I suppose, for a 50% reduction in my mind of the size of the tumours. And in fact, what had happened is that the right lung and the left lung, the major tumours, had greatly diminished. It was obviously there were small amounts of tumours still in the lungs, but it was just a massive change. And the oncologist was shocked by the rapid change in there, as was I. The thyroid cancer it didn't have such a dramatic change. It just reduced by about 50%, but it was still there. So that was like an early victory, and obviously went from quite a lot of panic in that months leading up to that, thinking that I wouldn't see my kids again, that I would, really was facing a death sentence, to feeling that, well, both the medication and the actions I were taking had actually significantly reversed the disease. So that was a really amazing feeling of control and optimism at that point. One of the other things of probably note in that kind of journey is the night before the scan, I had no idea between February, March and April whether I'd had any impact on the disease, because you know obviously the pain had gone, so I thought there must be shrinkage because it's coming off the spine, so it wasn't quite as bad, the pain. I felt better, but I didn't know, because till you get the scans you can't tell. So I do remember getting to a point there before that scan. I was thinking, well, I've done everything I can. I've made dramatic changes to my diet, to my body. I've done everything the hospitals ask in terms of heavy chemo, and I've done everything that I can research and see is common sense responses. Some people polarise and talk about solutions being single solutions. So in that period there were people putting pressure on me or saying, well, why don't you just do medical cannabis, forget the system? And of course there are other people in the hospital system who were saying, well, this medical cannabis is not something worth doing, because in Australia we're a little bit behind in adapting to that medicine, so that treatment. So you're getting a bit of polarisation. My response rate was when they've given me very little percentage chance to actually survive initially past 3 months. They were later going to change that to, they'd give me 2 years to live as the prognosis. My mind is that you try and do all the 1% that can get you back into some kind of survival percentage. So that's why I was doing things that I'd never done before, eating organic food and following up with various small diet changes to really alter the chemistry in my body, to try and alkalinize my system, to try and give myself a chance in terms of tumour reduction. And I'm beginning to research and find out about things that you need to do to keep your immune system strong. So there was a whole lot of education and a lot of time I was putting into that area. So April, with massive reductions in these tumours, in the lung tumours, there was a great deal of optimism. and surprised by my treating doctors. Now, then at that point, a lot of my actions to then have been driven by fear of death, and they've been, driven by a desire to live and see my children grow and study and develop and be around for my two children. So the next period, I lapsed off the medical cannabis, thinking it had done its role as a painkiller only, and my reading of the studies seemed to point to its strong role as a supplementary to chemo and as a painkiller. Obviously there's other claims that are put forward by people, but from what I could read, that made me ease up on that treatment. As the chemo kicked in, of course, any initial shrinkage that may have been caused by the chemo changed. And so I began to get the effects and side effects of chemo: lethargy, less activity, depression, loss of appetite, loss of hair, numb fingers and toes, and generally those things got more and more intense. So at the end of that, I've actually had a setback, because in late July we found that 4 major tumours, those are the 4 centimetre ones that were in the right lung and the one in the left lung, had actually returned. Not as great a mass, but they were on the way to forming back into a large mass again. And a 5th tumour in the adrenal gland was discovered. So that was a real setback, and I then had to kind of reach back and say, well, the doctors obviously changed their tact, and the hospital ceased the chemo treatment, and I had to think again, what was I doing that was helping or hindering this process? And obviously when I reviewed it, the diet has slipped off, activity and the exercise has slipped off. I did view the issue of loneliness and depression as, side effects in part from the chemotherapy, but they wouldn't help your immune system. So I redoubled my efforts and then tried to remember back to February what foods was I having, and tried to duplicate those same vegetables and fruit that I've been eating then.